This video is about MyPlate equivalents. So you should have seen this already in lesson 2. It's the image that's used to illustrate the recommendations given through dietary guidelines into consumer-friendly format. So one way that this is done is through the MyPlate image. And you can see that on the MyPlate, there's the different food groups there to indicate relative proportion of what we should get on our plate for each of these food groups. When we take it one step further, each of these food groups, we have recommended number of equivalents that we need to consume in order to prevent chronic disease and have an overall healthy diet. So what is an equivalent? Well, you may be familiar with the term serving, which we've moved away from now and replaced this with equivalents. So in each food group, there are a cup or ounce equivalents that are recommended based on our calorie level. And again, the information we put into our profile to create overall recommendations for food group consumption each day. So when we look at an equivalent, I think the dietary guidelines really explain it well. If you look here, it says some foods are more concentrated and some are more airy or contain more water. Cup and ounce equivalents identify the amounts of foods from each food group with similar nutritional content. And so they show a series of images here. So when we look at something from the vegetables group, we can see that a half a cup portion of green beans is equal to a half a cup equivalent vegetables. However, in comparison, when we look at something like spinach or our lettuces, we actually have to consume more of that in order to get the same amount of an equivalent. So in this case, a 1 cup portion of spinach is equal to a half a cup of equivalent of vegetables. Again, this is an indication that, this would be more airy, have more volume, and we therefore would have to consume a different amount to get the same amount of equivalent. So grains is the first one. Now this is measured in ounce equivalents. So you might have maybe 6 ounce, 8 ounce equivalents that's recommended for you. It's going to be different depending on your age, or again, your physical activity level, your gender, and your height and weight. But that profile that you set up in Super Tracker will really tell you how many equivalents you need in each of the food groups, including grains. But in order to figure out when you're consuming food, how many equivalents you've consumed, you need to know the quantity and the size and amount of food that you consumed and how that relates to equivalents. So 1 ounce grain equivalent is the same as 1 slice of bread. So I've got my food models here. So this is just a standard slice of bread, and this would be considered a 1 ounce equivalent. So the next one is a half a cup of cooked rice. Cereal pasta is also a 1 ounce grain equivalent. So this is a food model to show you, if you can see, hopefully you can distinguish, this is spaghetti. And this is actually a half a cup of spaghetti. Now, pay attention, make note that it's actually being spread out. So it may look larger than what you think, but this actually is a half a cup equivalent. So this would be a 1 ounce grain equivalent. So the next one is a 1 cup ready-to-eat cold cereal. Now, I recognize that different cereals have different weights, but for this class, just use the standard. Any kind of ready-to-eat cold cereal, 1 cup is a 1 ounce grain equivalent. So I've got in my baggie here, maybe bring it closer to the camera, you can see it's cornflakes. And this is looking at a 1 cup of cornflakes. So this would be a 1 ounce equivalent. So if you think about it, you can maybe kind of imagine this in a bowl, and it's kind of almost fits in my hand, thinking that's about a cup. So when you do your dietary analysis assignment, you are going to have to estimate to the best of your ability. I guess you could measure it out, but that might seem a little cumbersome to do, and may change behavior too. Eating behavior is from the research we find that. So you can just do your best guess as an estimate of how much you've consumed if you consume cold cereal. The next food group we're going to talk about is vegetables. So vegetables in Choose My Plate can be in any form. So sometimes it surprises people, but you can actually have a canned form or a frozen form or juice or a raw form, and those are all part of the dietary guidelines. Now we recognize that some of the canned vegetables have added sodium, so you may want to look at lower sodium options. Sometimes we know from research too that if you have something like a canned legume, which can count as a vegetable, you can actually rinse that, and we know that if you rinse it off, it actually reduces sodium as well. We have research to support that. But what's nice about knowing that you can use canned and frozen is sometimes during the year, those can be more affordable options. And you'll learn about later that they actually can have better nutrient retention. So how much is an equivalent? Well, I showed you that example before, and this is really what we see is that something that's raw or cooked vegetable goes straight across. So a cup of raw or cooked vegetable is a 1 cup vegetable equivalent. However, when we talk about our leafy greens or salad, we have to consume double that in order to get the same amount of equivalent. So for a 1 cup vegetable equivalent, you'd need to consume 2 cups of leafy greens. So what are the consumer messages? Well, we recommend having 5 subgroups. So that includes a variety of different colors in your diet. Now this, you don't need to memorize the subgroups. You just need to know what foods would fit into the vegetable group, one's the limit, ones that are recommended, and then knowing what equivalents are. But the 5 subgroups, just for those who are interested, include dark green, orange deep yellow, legumes, starchy, and other. And the last thing is you can see on the plate that half of our plate really should be fruits and vegetables, so vegetables falls within that as well. So I want to show you a couple of examples from food models. So if we look at green beans, this is looking at a 1/2 cup equivalent. Again, I kind of put it here so you can see. That would be considered a 1/2 cup of vegetable equivalent, just goes right across. Here's a cup of baby carrots. So 1 cup of baby carrots would also be a 1 cup vegetable equivalent. And when we look at leafy greens, you can see here, this is a food model of lettuce and a salad, and this is 1 cup. So this would only be a 1/2 cup vegetable equivalent. We'll come back to legumes in a little bit. What about fruits? Well, same thing here. You can consume different forms. So canned, frozen, dried fruit, juice, and raw. So what do we do for equivalents here? Well, it really depends on what we're consuming. So if you have fresh, frozen, or canned fruit, this just goes straight across. So a 1 cup equivalent would be a 1 cup of those fresh, frozen, or canned fruit would be a 1 cup fruit equivalent. What about when you eat a piece of fruit? Well, this is a little bit different. So approximately 1 large piece of fruit or 2 small pieces of fruit would be about a 1 cup fruit equivalent. So what might be a small piece of fruit? Well, you can think about that as maybe like an apricot. If it's a smaller one, that might that could fit there. A large might be, something like a large apple or orange. What about dried fruit? Well, you've taken the water out, so we don't need to consume as much to have the same amount equivalent. So a 1/4 cup of dried fruit is actually a 1/2 cup of fruit equivalent. So let me give some examples here. So here we've got 1 cup of strawberries. So again, this would be a 1 cup fruit equivalent. What else do I have? Let's see. Oh, I've got some juice. So this is a 3/4 cup of juice. So this actually goes across as well. So this is a 3/4 cup of juice. And here I've got a peach. You could probably argue that this is a little bit bigger than a small piece of fruit. So this is more of a medium-sized piece of fruit. So probably, I don't have medium up there, but I would put it probably about a 3/4 cup equivalent because it's in between that 1 large and 2 small. So I actually have a real pear in my office. This is left over from my lunch today, ready for me to have as a snack. And I would say this is probably a little bit bigger than a small, but maybe not quite even medium. But I still probably would put it about 3/4 cup. And sometimes what I do is I think in my mind, if I cut this up, what would it fit into? And that sometimes gives me an idea of about how many equivalents it is. Again, in your project, when you do the dietary analysis, you're going to have to think about in the context of estimation. So you can think about in your head, where would this fit in with cups, and do your best to equivalate that. Okay. Oh, there's my juice. So again, go straight across. So my example up there is a 1/2 cup of juice, which is a 1/2 cup fruit equivalent. However, this cup is actually 6 ounces or 3/4 of a cup of juice. I would really encourage you to think about how big are your glasses that you use. You might actually be surprised how much fluid you're getting through juice or milk. based on your size of your cup. Now, of course, those are healthy foods, but we got to think about how many equivalents we need each day. And most of us are probably for fruit are about a 2-cup equivalent. So you may find that you actually are going above and beyond your equivalents. Now, you might argue that you've heard fruit's really healthy, and that is true. So if we go over our fruit equivalents, maybe it's not so concerning. However, what I would say is that juice tends to have, it's going to have more calories than you would in a piece of fruit. And part of it's because think about how many oranges you needed to squeeze in order to get this amount of juice. So the idea is that you're actually going to have more calories here in this juice than you would by eating the orange itself. So if calories is one of your concerns, and we did talk about calorie control being part of a healthy diet, then we probably want to think about thinking about how much we have of juice and making sure that we also get fruit for its fiber and also thinking about calorie control. Again, you can have juice. We just want to make sure it's within our recommendations, and then we don't always just choose juice, but we choose other fruit as well. So same message as the vegetables, half of your plate, fruits and vegetables. And here's my choosing whole or cut up fruits more often than fruit juice for the reasons I just mentioned. What about dairy? So what's important here is to remember that the recommendation is fat-free or low-fat. So low-fat referring to 1%. So 2% or a whole dairy product is one we want to limit in our diet. We want to try to get more fat-free or low-fat options into our diet. So what we see for equivalent of a 1 cup milk equivalent is a 1 cup of yogurt. It's 1.5 ounces of natural cheese, 2 ounces of processed cheese, 2 cups of cottage cheese, 1.5 cups of ice cream, or 1 cup of calcium fortified soy milk. So a couple of things here. What is the difference between natural and processed cheese? Well, processed cheese is things like Velveeta or cheese spread or something that's packaged in individual slices. American cheese would be a good example of that. Natural cheeses are things like mozzarella or cheddar or Gouda, even things like some of the soft cheeses may be actual natural cheese as well. You can read the label to see whether or not it actually has natural cheeses listed. Swiss cheese. Some of my favorite is Havarti or Gouda. Those are 2 of my favorite cheeses. But there are a lot of different varieties out there for natural cheeses. And you might wonder, why is ice cream listed here? Isn't that one that we wouldn't want to get because it has higher amounts of sugar? And it may also have, if it's not a fat-free or low-fat, it's definitely going to have higher amounts of fat and be a one to limit. We definitely want to still say we would want to limit this food because of the added sugars and potential added fats. But what I would say is it still has calcium in it, and so you can get some of that calcium within consuming ice cream, but it's definitely not going to be one that we recommend to consume often. And then for those who are lactose intolerant or who just don't like to drink dairy, maybe they're vegan or vegetarian, you can substitute a soy milk that's been calcium fortified. And I would just make a note here. So some people like almond milk more, but almond milk actually would not fit into the dairy group. It's actually classified as a protein food because it's made from almonds. So let's see what dairy foods I have here. So I've got an 8-ounce fluid ounce of milk. So this gives you a sense again of size of what that would be. So this is 1 cup. And then I also have a piece of cheddar cheese. So this would be probably about 1.5 ounces. So this would be equivalent to a 1 cup milk or dairy equivalent. Okay, a 1 cup dairy equivalent. Again, sometimes you'll know the size based on what's in the packaging, but you may not know. So you can do your best estimate of thinking about how your slices compare to this piece here. Protein foods. This is measured in ounce equivalents. So when we think about 1 ounce of protein foods is equal to 1 ounce straight across of different types of meats. So think about when you go to the restaurant and you order some kind of a steak. Now, sometimes you can get a 20-ounce steak or even a larger steak or a smaller steak, 12 ounce, 16 ounce, 20 ounce. And what I will say is once you figure out how many equivalents you need in the protein foods group, you're going to recognize that those size of steaks are much larger than what's needed. Now, remember in context that overall we're talking about on average how much you're consuming in your overall diet. However, I would say that in some cases like that, you may be wise to think about maybe cutting it in half or even smaller, or sharing it so that you're really staying closer to what's recommended for you within the protein foods group. So again, straight across 1 ounce of any of those types of meats is a 1 ounce protein foods equivalent. Well, what about other things like nuts and eggs, peanut butter? How does this work in legumes? So one egg is equal to a 1 ounce protein foods equivalent. A fourth a cup of cooked legumes or tofu is considered a 1 ounce protein foods equivalent. A half ounce of nuts or seeds is considered a protein foods equivalent, or 1 teaspoon of peanut butter. So with this, the consumer message is prepare with little or no added fat. So let's see what kind of protein foods I have here. Well, I've got a hamburger, and here you can really see that this really fits in the palm of my hand. And when we talk about meat, we often talk about a 3 ounce, so this is 3 ounces. And often we talk about how the palm of our hand is about a 3 ounce equivalent of meat. So that can give you a sense of estimation. What about chicken? So if you see the chicken breast in the store that I see, this is about half the size of what we normally get in a chicken breast. And in some cases, it might even be, chicken breast might even be 3 times the size, depending on the type of chicken breast you purchase. So, but when we think about a serving, an equivalent of, well, this is a 3 ounce equivalent. And when we think about a 3 ounce equivalent, this would fit also in the palm of my hand. So just think about that the next time you have chicken breasts. Think about in the context of what's recommended for you each day and how much you actually are consuming. The last one I have here is legumes. So this is actually a half a cup of legumes. So here again, kind of show it in my hand, there's a half a cup of legumes. And so this would be actually a 2 ounce protein foods equivalent. Again, half a cup of cooked legumes, 2 ounce protein foods equivalent. So I want to make a final statement about legumes. Legumes is an interesting food because it actually can fit into 2 different food groups. So it's really rich in fiber, which makes it like a vegetable, because vegetables are rich in fiber. However, they also are really great. They also have protein, and they're a good source of protein. And so in that way, they're like meat. So it's very interesting because you can actually count it in both. So this half a cup of legumes could be counted as a protein food, which we just did in the last slide. So this half a cup would be a 2 ounce protein foods equivalent. But if I counted it as a vegetable, then this half a cup of legumes would be a half a cup of vegetable equivalent. So now when you do your assignments, only count it in one, do not count it in both. Granted, yes, you're definitely, when you're consuming this, you're getting both the fiber and the protein and the other nutrients in it. But when we look at how we classify it based on Choose My Plate and dietary guidelines, we're just going to classify it into one of those groups. So how do you decide which one to classify into? Well, I kind of do it like this with my own diet. If let's say I'm consuming, one day I'm consuming, I'm not getting a lot of other types of protein foods, but I am getting legumes, then I'm going to count it in my protein foods group. But maybe on another day, I'm getting other types of protein foods, but my vegetable group isn't as high as, or I see that I haven't had as much vegetables, but I have plenty of protein foods, then I'm going to count it as a vegetable. But ultimately, you do get the nutrients, regardless of where you count it. But remember on your assignments just to count it into one. And make sure you understand the equivalents if it were put in the protein foods group and the equivalents if it were put in the vegetables group. So what about practicing food group equivalents? This is a lot of information. How can you really try to hone in and understand and be able to memorize all of this information? Well, these are just some ideas. So you can definitely use the Canvas module activity to be able to reinforce these concepts, including the exam review that will be on Canvas as well. You could go to the TA office during their hours to practice. You could make flashcards and practice yourself. But ultimately, I think the fun thing about this class is that you can take the information you're learning today and just start applying it into real life. And so when you think about it, if you understand how many equivalents you need in each food group, as you're consuming food throughout the day, you can kind of be estimating in your mind how you're doing at each meal. So I would encourage you, as you're eating, practice yourself. And thinking about, okay, what's the size and how many equivalents would that be? What food groups does it go into? What are the nutrients that are high in this food? I think that will really help you to, if you practice with yourself and what you eat, I think it'll help you to better understand this information. And honestly, this is what I do in real life. I think about kind of what I've eaten in the day and think about, okay, how many equivalents have I had? What do I need to add to this next meal? Or do I need to have additional snack to kind of get me up to where my recommendations are? So I'd encourage you again to think about how you can apply this directly into your own life right away. So I hope this video was helpful. If you do have questions, I know sometimes this is a tricky area to think about equivalents and to think about all the things you need to memorize. So if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me or to the TAs.